She sat there and took it. Every insult. Every laugh. Every cruel joke about her $14 an hour paycheck. Jennifer Dyer, a payroll clerk from Dayton, Ohio, endured public humiliation in a Chicago courtroom while her ex-husband and his expensive lawyer treated her poverty like a punchline. They demanded she surrender custody because she couldn't afford to be a mother. But what they didn't know would change everything. What they didn't know was that Jennifer wasn't poor, she was patient. And in exactly 47 minutes, a confidentiality clause protecting her $4.2 billion inheritance would expire. This is the story of a woman who chose the perfect moment to stop being invisible. And trust me, you'll want to see the look on their faces when she finally speaks. Stay until the end, because what happens when that clock strikes 12 will leave you speechless. The air in courtroom 9C smelled of lemon-scented floor cleaner and old wood polish, but to Jennifer Dyer, it smelled like judgment. The overhead lights hummed with a low, persistent buzz, casting harsh shadows across the mahogany benches and making everything look sharper, colder, more unforgiving than it already was. Jennifer sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, breath shallow. She was wearing her best blazer, a gray one she'd found at a Goodwill in Dayton for $15. She'd steamed it that morning, but she could still see a faint thread pull near the shoulder seam. She hoped the judge wouldn't notice. Across the aisle, it was a different world. Brandon Hale sat sprawled in his chair like a man who'd already won, legs crossed, expensive Italian loafers gleaming under the courtroom lights. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Jennifer's monthly rent. He leaned over and whispered something to his lawyer, and both men chuckled, low, casual, the kind of laughter that said they weren't worried about a thing. His lawyer was Daniel Ashford. The Daniel Ashford. The kind of attorney who didn't just win custody cases. He obliterated the opposition and sent them home with nothing. He was a man who billed $350 an hour, and wore a Rolex he checked every few minutes. As if Jennifer's poverty was personally inconveniencing his schedule. Order, Judge Patricia Coleman said flatly, her voice tired. She was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, and a reputation for despising drawn-out domestic disputes. She shuffled the papers on her bench without looking up. We're here to finalize custody arrangements and financial support regarding the minor, Ethan Dyer Hale. Mr. Ashford, you may proceed. Daniel Ashford rose smoothly. He didn't stand, he performed. He buttoned his jacket with a crisp snap, and turned toward the judge with the kind of confidence that only comes from never losing. Your Honor, Ashford began, his voice smooth and measured. This case is regrettably straightforward. It's a matter of stability. It's a matter of simple arithmetic. He walked slowly toward the defense table where Jennifer sat, frozen. He looked at her not with anger, but with pity, which somehow felt worse. Miss Dyer, Ashford said, holding up a single sheet of paper between two fingers like it was contaminated. This is your W-2 from last year. Is that correct? Yes, Jennifer said quietly. Speak up, please, Ashford said gently, as if coaching a child. The court reporter needs to hear you. Yes, Jennifer repeated, louder this time. And according to this document, Ashford continued, turning toward the gallery, your gross annual income before taxes was $29,120. Is that correct? A murmur rippled through the small crowd of observers. Brandon inspected his fingernails, smirking. Yes, Jennifer said. $29,000, Ashford repeated slowly, letting the number settle like dust. You work as a payroll clerk at a manufacturing plant in Dayton. Is that right? I process employee payments, Jennifer said, a flicker of pride breaking through her nerves. It's important work. I'm sure it is, Ashford said with a patronizing smile. But does this important work allow you to provide private tutoring for Ethan? Does it allow you to live in a neighborhood with decent schools? Does it allow you to afford health insurance? I have coverage through the state, Jennifer said. And Ethan is happy. He loves our apartment. Your apartment? Ashford said, raising an eyebrow. He walked back to his table and picked up a glossy photograph. He projected it onto the screen at the front of the courtroom. It was a picture of Jennifer's building, a tired-looking walk-up in a working-class part of Dayton. The paint was peeling on the front steps. A chain-link fence surrounded the parking lot. "Your Honor," Ashford addressed the judge, "my client, Mr. Hale, is a senior consultant at Vanguard Solutions. He earns over $380,000 annually, not including performance bonuses. He lives in a gated community with award-winning schools. He has established a trust fund for Ethan's college education. He has hired a part-time tutor with a master's degree in childhood development." Ashford turned back to Jennifer, closing the distance between them. He leaned in slightly, his cologne, something woody and expensive, filling her nostrils. "Miss Dyer, let's be honest. You're struggling. You're clipping coupons. You're one unexpected expense away from financial collapse. To grant you primary custody would be, frankly, negligent. You simply cannot afford to be a proper parent." The words hit Jennifer like a slap. Cannot afford to be a proper parent. Brandon let out a short, audible laugh. "She can barely afford to feed herself," he muttered, loud enough for the front row to hear. Objection. Jennifer's court-appointed lawyer, a young woman named Amy Chin, shot to her feet. Amy was 27, overworked, and visibly outmatched. "Counsel is being argumentative and demeaning." Sustained. Judge Coleman said with a sigh, rubbing her temple. "Mr. Ashford, stick to the facts." "The facts, Your Honor," Ashford said, spreading his hands wide, "are that Miss Dyer is financially insolvent. She is a burden waiting to collapse. My client is willing to offer a reasonable compromise. $500 per month in support, in exchange for full custody and her voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. We believe this is the only responsible outcome." $500. It was an insult wrapped in legal language. It was a crumb tossed to a starving dog. Jennifer looked across the aisle at Brandon. He winked at her. Cold, calculated, vicious. He didn't want Ethan because he loved him. He wanted Ethan because winning meant Jennifer lost. "I won't sign," Jennifer said, her voice trembling but firm. "I won't give up my son." Ashford sighed theatrically, shaking his head. "Your Honor, if the defendant refuses to see reason, we move to request a full financial audit. We believe she may be concealing debt. We want to prove, beyond any doubt, that she is financially incapable." "Order," Judge Coleman said, looking directly at Jennifer. "Miss Dyer, do you have any other sources of income? Any assets not listed in your disclosure?" Jennifer looked down at her hands. She thought about the leather folder sitting in her canvas tote bag under the table. The folder she had promised herself she wouldn't touch unless there was no other choice. She looked at Brandon's smug face. She looked at Ashford's predatory grin. "No, Your Honor," Jennifer lied. "I live on my salary alone." "Then God help you," Judge Coleman muttered. "Court is in recess until 2 p.m. At that time, I will issue my ruling on custody." The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Brandon walked past Jennifer as he exited the courtroom. He leaned down, his breath hot against her ear. "You should have taken the 500, Jen," he whispered. "Now you're going to lose him. And you're going to end up with nothing." He laughed and walked out, Ashford trailing behind him like a loyal attack dog. Jennifer sat alone in the empty courtroom. Her hands were shaking. She reached down and touched the tote bag at her feet. She could feel the weight of the folder through the canvas. Heavy, solid, real. It's time, she thought. They wanted to talk about net worth? Let's talk about net worth. To understand why Jennifer Dyer, a woman worth billions, was being mocked for a $15 blazer and a $29,000 salary, you have to understand the story of William Dyer. To understand why Jennifer Dyer, a woman worth billions, was being mocked for a $15 blazer and a $29,000 salary, you have to understand the story of William Dyer. But that would come later. Right now, in this moment, Jennifer was still just a payroll clerk being torn apart in public. The humiliation hadn't ended with the recess announcement. Before the judge had called the break, Ashford had spent 20 brutal minutes dismantling Jennifer's life piece by piece, holding up each fragment like evidence at a crime scene. "Your Honor, if I may direct the court's attention to Exhibit C," Ashford had said, projecting another image onto the screen. This time it was a photo of Jennifer's car. A 2009 Honda Civic with a dented bumper and a crack spreading across the windshield like a spiderweb. "This is the vehicle Miss Dyer uses to transport the child. No airbag indicator light visible. Inspection sticker expired 3 months ago." Jennifer had felt her face burn. She'd been saving up for that inspection. "And here," Ashford continued, pulling out a bank statement Jennifer's lawyer had been forced to provide during discovery, "we can see Miss Dyer's monthly grocery expenditure averages $180. That's roughly $6 per day for 2 people. Your Honor, the USDA recommends a minimum of $400 monthly for a family of 2. Brandon had leaned back in his chair, barely suppressing a grin. Under his breath, just loud enough for Jennifer to hear, he muttered, "Should have married someone with ambition instead of playing house." "Miss Dyer is not just poor," Ashford had said, turning to face her directly. "She is dangerously poor. She is one medical emergency, one job loss, one broken appliance away from homelessness. To place a child in this environment is unconscionable." Amy Chen had tried. She really had. "Your Honor, my client works full-time. She's never missed a rent payment. She's never neglected." "Counsel," Judge Coleman had interrupted, "unless you have financial documentation proving Miss Dyer's situation is better than presented, I suggest you save your arguments for closing." Amy had sat down, defeated. Jennifer's mind had drifted during those terrible minutes, back to the nights she'd worked double shifts at the plant so Ethan could have new sneakers for school, back to the meals she'd skipped so he could have seconds, back to the birthday when she'd bought him the science kit he wanted and quietly returned the winter coat she'd picked out for herself. She'd done everything right. She'd sacrificed everything, and they were using it against her. Now, sitting alone as the courtroom emptied, Jennifer's hand moved to the tote bag under the table. Her fingers found the leather folder inside, thick, heavy, real. She heard footsteps. Brandon appeared beside her, leaning down with that same cruel smile. "You should have taken the money, Jen," he whispered. "Now you'll lose everything." He walked away laughing. Jennifer checked her watch. 1:47 p.m. 13 minutes until the clause expired. 13 minutes until they learned exactly what they'd done. Jennifer sat in the courthouse cafeteria, staring at a cup of vending machine coffee she hadn't touched. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone's phone rang in the distance. The world kept moving, indifferent to the fact that hers was falling apart. Or so they thought. She hated courtrooms. Hated the marble coldness of them. The way they reduced human lives to exhibits and dollar amounts. She hated being underestimated, talked over, dismissed like she was invisible. But most of all, she hated what Brandon had become. Or maybe what he'd always been. And she'd just been too young to see it. She remembered the early days. Brandon had been charming, ambitious, full of big dreams and bigger promises. He'd loved her laugh, her kindness, the way she saw good in people. But somewhere along the way, love turned into scorekeeping. When his career took off and hers didn't, the resentment started. Small comments at first. "Maybe you should look into something more prestigious." Then bigger ones. "I can't take you to the company gala looking like that." The divorce wasn't about falling out of love. It was about control. Brandon couldn't stand that she was happy with enough when he always needed more. Jennifer's hand drifted to the tote bag at her feet. The leather folder inside felt solid, grounding. "They weren't wrong about my paycheck," she thought, a strange calm settling over her. "But they were catastrophically wrong about my net worth." She pulled out her phone and checked the time. 1:52 p.m. 8 minutes. 8 minutes until the confidentiality clause expired. 8 minutes until William Dyer's final test was complete. 8 minutes until she could stop being invisible. Jennifer stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked back toward courtroom 9C. It was time to be seen. 6 months earlier, Jennifer had been sitting in her apartment sorting through mail when the envelope arrived. It wasn't ordinary mail. The paper was thick, cream-colored, expensive. A wax seal pressed into burgundy held it closed. The courier who delivered it had waited, clipboard in hand, until she signed for it. Inside was a letter that began, "Miss Jennifer Marie Dyer, you are hereby summoned to the reading of the last will and testament of William Edward Dyer." William Dyer. Her grandfather. A man she'd met exactly twice in her life. He wasn't a celebrity billionaire. You wouldn't find him on Forbes lists or Twitter. William Dyer was old money. The kind that owned the land under the skyscrapers, not the skyscrapers themselves. He'd built his fortune in commercial real estate in the 1960s. Office towers in Chicago's Loop, warehouse districts in Dallas, luxury developments in San Francisco. Quiet. Calculated. Invisible. Jennifer's mother had been his only child. She'd run away at 19 to marry a jazz musician William deemed unsuitable. He cut them off completely. Jennifer grew up loved but struggling, knowing she had a wealthy grandfather who wanted nothing to do with her. Her parents died when she was 22. William never came to the funeral. The will reading took place in a private library in downtown Chicago. The executor, a skeletal man named Arthur Pendergast, sat across from her with a leather portfolio. "Trusts," he said, flipping through pages. "Properties in 6 countries. Commercial holdings. Art collection. Mineral rights." He slid a final page across the table. Jennifer stared at the number at the bottom. $4,200,000,000. $4.2 billion. Her hands shook. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. "There is, however," Pendergast said carefully, "a condition." Jennifer looked up. "A confidentiality clause. For 6 months, you cannot reveal this inheritance to anyone. You must continue living exactly as you are." "Why?" Jennifer whispered. Pendergast's expression softened. "Your grandfather wanted to see what you were made of." "The clause is non-negotiable," Pendergast had explained, sliding the document across the polished table. "For exactly 6 months from the date of this reading, you may not disclose the inheritance to anyone outside this office. No lifestyle changes. No purchases. No hints." Jennifer had stared at the legal language, her mind spinning. But why? What's the point? Pendergast had pulled out a handwritten letter. William Dyer's shaky script on ivory paper. "You must face your demons without the shield of my money. Character is forged in fire, not comfort. If you can endure 6 months as yourself, truly yourself, then you deserve what I've left you." So Jennifer had endured. She kept the same job, processing payroll at the manufacturing plant. Kept the same apartment with the leaky faucet she couldn't afford to fix. Kept driving the Honda with the cracked windshield. She'd wake up some mornings and wonder if she'd dreamed the whole thing. If the number in that portfolio was real or some cruel joke. And Brandon? He'd grown bolder during those months. More demands. More threats. He'd filed for full custody 3 months into the clause period, as if he could smell weakness. The timing was almost poetic. The custody hearing fell on the exact day the 6-month period ended. Coincidence? Jennifer had thought when she saw the court date. Or one final test. Now as she walked back toward courtroom 9C, she checked her watch one more time. 2 p.m. The clause had expired at noon 2 hours ago. She was free. Jennifer reached into her tote bag and felt the leather folder. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin. The cheap blazer suddenly didn't matter. The scuffed shoes didn't matter. Through the courtroom doors, she could see Brandon and Ashford already seated, laughing about something. They had no idea what was about to walk through that door. Jennifer pushed it open. The final act was about to begin. All rise. Judge Coleman returned to the bench, reading glasses perched on her nose, papers in hand. She looked tired, ready to end this quickly and move on to the next broken family. "Be seated," she said. "We are back on the record for Dyer Hale custody matter. I've reviewed the financial disclosures, and frankly, this decision is straightforward. Miss Dyer, while I commend your work ethic, the disparity in resources is simply too. Your Honor. Jennifer stood, her voice clear and steady. The courtroom went silent. Even Amy Chen looked surprised. Judge Coleman paused, frowning. Miss Dyer, I haven't issued my ruling yet. I understand, Your Honor, but I'd like to submit additional evidence. Financial documentation that wasn't available during the initial discovery period. Ashford scoffed. Your Honor, this is a transparent delay tactic. Let her speak, Judge Coleman said, curiosity flickering across her face. Miss Dyer approached. Jennifer reached into her tote bag. Her fingers closed around the leather folder. Heavy, official, undeniable. She walked to the bench, her cheap shoes quiet on the marble floor. She opened the folder. Gold seals. Notarized stamps. Bank letterhead embossed in silver. Trust documents with names like the Dyer Family Estate and Dyer Properties International. Your Honor, Jennifer said calmly, 6 months ago, I inherited my grandfather's estate. The confidentiality period expired today at noon. I am the sole beneficiary of the William Edward Dyer Trust. She slid the portfolio across the bench. The total value is $4.2 billion. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Judge Coleman's eyes widened. She looked down at the documents, then back up at Jennifer. I'm sorry, did you say? $4.2 billion, Jennifer repeated. Behind her, she heard Brandon's sharp intake of breath. Judge Coleman flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to something close to awe. Brandon's confident smile crumbled like sand. Judge Coleman adjusted her glasses, examining each page with methodical precision. Bank statements from institutions Jennifer had never heard of. Property deeds spanning 3 continents. Trust fund certificates with numbers that seemed almost obscene. These are certified, the judge said quietly, almost to herself. Ashford stood, his usual confidence fractured. Your Honor, we had no knowledge of. This changes nothing about the mother's fitness to. Mr. Ashford. Judge Coleman's voice could have cut glass. Sit down. The courtroom doors opened. 3 figures entered. 2 men and a woman, all in immaculate suits, carrying leather briefcases embossed with gold lettering. Whitmore and Associates, Estate Law. Your Honor, the woman said smoothly. I'm Margaret Whitmore, representing the Dyer Family Trust. We apologize for our delayed arrival. The confidentiality clause prevented our earlier involvement. Brandon had gone pale. He leaned toward Ashford, whispering urgently. Ashford waved him off, looking like a man watching his career implode. Your Honor, Brandon said suddenly, standing. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never intended to suggest Jennifer was unfit. I simply wanted what was best for Ethan. Perhaps we could reconsider joint custody. Mr. Hale. Judge Coleman removed her glasses. You spent this entire proceeding weaponizing your ex-wife's income. You mocked her poverty. Your attorney suggested she was too poor to be a parent. She gestured at the documents. It appears your judgment was catastrophically flawed. Judge Coleman straightened the papers with a sharp tap. Full physical and legal custody is awarded to Jennifer Dyer. Mr. Hale, you will pay all court costs and Ms. Dyer's legal fees. Supervised visitation will be arranged through the appropriate channels. The gavel fell. Brandon stared, mouth open, all arrogance evaporated. Jennifer didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't even look at him. She simply closed her eyes and breathed out. Long, slow, free. It was over. The call started that evening. Brandon. Jen, we need to talk. I think we both said things in the heat of the moment. Brandon. I was just trying to do what I thought was right for Ethan. You understand, right? Brandon. Please. Can we at least discuss this like adults? Jennifer deleted each one without responding. By the end of the week, the media had caught whispers of the courtroom reversal. Billionaire heiress wins custody battle. But Margaret Whitmore's team had already locked down every outlet with carefully worded legal threats. The story died before it could breathe. We could make an example of him, Margaret had suggested during their first official meeting. Countersuits. Public statements. Your grandfather's estate has resources too. No, Jennifer said firmly. I don't need revenge. I just need him out of my life. Margaret had smiled. Understood. Though there is one matter you should be aware of. She'd slid a document across the table. During probate, we discovered your grandfather held minority shares in several corporations. One of them is Vanguard Solutions, Brandon's company. As of last month, those shares transferred to you. You now own 8% of the firm. Margaret paused. The board held an emergency meeting yesterday. Given the optics of Mr. Hale's behavior, they felt a leadership change was appropriate. Jennifer had stared at the termination notice, Brandon's name printed across the top. She hadn't asked for it, hadn't demanded it. But her grandfather, even from the grave, had ensured consequences. Brandon tried to reach her one final time, appearing outside her apartment building 3 weeks later. Jennifer saw him from her window, smaller somehow diminished. She didn't go down. She simply closed the curtain and walked away. Her power didn't need to shout. It simply was. Jennifer didn't buy a mansion. She bought a brownstone in Lincoln Park, 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, close to a good public school. It had wooden floors that creaked and windows that let in morning light. It felt like home. Ethan adjusted quickly. His new school had a science program he loved. He made friends. He laughed more. At night, they'd cook dinner together. Nothing fancy, just pasta or tacos. And he'd tell her about his day. The simple things they'd always done, just without the weight of fear pressing down on them. Their mornings became sacred. Breakfast at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming through the windows. Jennifer would make scrambled eggs while Ethan worked on homework he'd forgotten the night before. Then she'd drive him to school in a new car, practical, safe, nothing ostentatious, and watch him run toward the entrance, backpack bouncing. These were the moments money couldn't buy. She'd had them before the inheritance, and she had them now. The difference was that no one could take them away anymore. One Saturday, Jennifer drove to Oakwood Cemetery. William Dyer's grave was simple. Gray granite, clean lines, no flourishes. Just his name and dates. As understated as the man himself. She stood there for a long time, hands in her coat pockets, watching leaves skitter across the grass. You were right, she said quietly. About the test. About facing it without the money. She paused. They thought money made the woman. But character is what survived without it. The wind answered, cool and constant. Jennifer turned and walked back to her car. Ethan was waiting at home. They were going to the Science Museum this afternoon. She drove through the city, the skyline rising against a clear autumn sky. For the first time in years, Jennifer Dyer wasn't invisible. She was simply finally free.